Masechet Gittin, Daf Kaf Chet. We have two Mishnayot that are going to be about presumptions of someone being alive or dead. Hamevi get v'hinnicho zaken o chole noten la becheskat shehu kayam. Someone is a messenger to bring a get from the husband to the wife. Now, when the messenger left the husband, the last time the messenger saw him, he was either old or sick, and therefore there is a greater possibility that he may die at some point soon. And nevertheless, we do not worry about that. Instead, the agent can go ahead and deliver the get to the wife because we have a chazakah, a prior assumption. We follow the status quo. The last time we saw him, he was alive, even if not necessarily well, and therefore we assume he is alive until we know otherwise. Now, if he actually does die in the meantime, while the messenger would be going, then the agency would be canceled, and there would be no more marriage, because death also is an end to marriage. And so that's what we are worried about. But the Mishnah says you don't have to worry about that, even if the person is sick. And now we apply the same law to two more applications. Bat Yisrael nisua lechohen vehalach ba'ala lemedinat hayam ochelet b'truma becheskat shehu kayam. A daughter of Israel cannot eat teruma, but once she's married to a kohen, all the time that they're married, she is permitted to eat teruma. Now here's the thing, the husband goes away on a trip, and we don't know if he's alive or dead. We follow the chazakah. The last time we saw him, he was alive, and therefore we can assume, wherever he went, we assume that he is still alive, and she can continue to eat teruma based on that assumption. We don't say, well, you never know, he might be in a boat accident, he might be captured, he might become sick, so we don't worry about that and say, okay, you know what, don't eat teruma until you see him and know he's alive now. No, we can use a chazakah for this purpose. Third case, if someone sends a hatat offering, they made a sin, they are not able to bring the korban themselves, they send it with a messenger from elsewhere. Now, in the meantime, it could be that the person died, and maybe again, he is elderly or sick. And in that case, if he died, we cannot offer if we know he died, we cannot offer this sacrifice anymore on his behalf. Nevertheless, we go ahead and we offer it as a regular hatat offering, following the chazakah that he is still alive. The Gemara will talk about why we need all three cases. Amar Rava, lo shanu ela zaken shelo higia ligvurot vechole sherob cholim lechayim, aval zaken shehigia ligvurot vegoses sherob gosesin lemita lo. Rava qualifies and limits the leniency of the Mishnah. And he said it's only true regarding someone elderly that has not reached the years of strength. In the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, that is called 80 years old. 80 years old today is the new 50. But back then, 80 years old, wow, that's this person is really old. And therefore, if he's 80 and above, when we left him, then, by time the agent goes, that's it. You lose your chazakah, because that's already too old. And also, someone sick, that's only talking about a regular sickness, the type of sickness that most people do recover from. But if someone is terminally ill on his deathbed, the type of sickness that most people do not recover from, then again, the agent cannot just deliver the get. He has to verify that the person's still alive when he is delivering the get. So it would be basically impossible for a person on his deathbed to send a get if the wife is far away. Because in that case, we can the assumption does not work. The assumption is only good if he's under 80 and has a sickness that most people will recover from. All right, that is Rava's limitation. Itibeh Abaye hamevi get v'nicho zaken afilu ben me'ah shana noten la becheskat shu kayam tiyuvta. However, this limitation of Abaye is contradicted by a braita that says explicitly someone who brings an agent and he leaves the person. When he leaves the person, he's elderly. Even if he's 100 years old, he still gives it to the wife, based on the chazakah that the person is alive. So you have a braita that clearly contradicts Rava, and therefore Rava is contradicted. And as we say, this is not true, right? Otherwise, it would be very difficult. It would be impossible for anyone on their deathbed or someone who's over 80, they can't divorce their wife with an agent, who's more than a few days away, because then you wouldn't be able to verify. And so he is contradicted. However, or if you really do want to go and save Rava, you can. Kevan de iflig, maybe 100 is actually different from 80. Right? Once a person reaches a very old age, you know what? You made it this far. Okay, then we can assume you're going to keep going, right? You have some kind of good genes, some good diet. And so we can assume that you'll continue. I mean, everybody eventually dies, so the chazakah will come to an end. But the point of a chazakah is that there's no reason to assume that it's imminent any more than anybody else. So for most people, 80, that's like the average age, and so past 80, we assume no, about someone that lives well past 80, okay, then they regain their chazakah, which is a really interesting concept. Okay, Rami le Abaye le Rabba. Abaye asked his teacher Rabba a question. Rami means he is bringing two sources of the same authority, two Tanaitic sources that seem to contradict each other. Tenan, one is our Mishnah. Hamebi get v'nicho zaken o chole noten b'cheskat shu kayam. Our Mishnah says you assume someone is alive even if they're sick or elderly. What do you mean who? This Braita says if someone gives a get to his wife and says this get will come into effect, one shah is not necessarily an hour, could it be a short time, a minute, before I die. Now why would someone write a get like that? Because he doesn't want his wife to have to be subject, for example, to yibum. Maybe he has a younger brother who's a minor, who's only 5 years old, and then she won't be able to get remarried until that 5-year-old grows up, and then has to do chalitza, or maybe will want to do yibum and torture her life and make her an aguna. So therefore, this husband says, I want to give you, I don't want to give you a get now because I'm not dead yet. I want to continue to be married. So here's a get that will take effect a minute before I die. Now, this guy is not necessarily sick. It doesn't matter, and he's not doing it through an agent. So it's a bit of a different case, but it is similar in that we don't know exactly when he's going to die. And the halacha is that if a husband gives a get to his wife, such a get, she has to stop eating terumah immediately, because we never know when he's going to die. Even if he's right here and he's running around and he's well, who knows? He may die in 1 minute from now, and then retroactively she will have been divorced from this Kohen husband and was not allowed to eat terumah, and then she will have retroactively violated eating terumah. So over here we don't apply a chazakah and say, well, he's alive now. Let's assume he's alive. And that he will be alive and continue to eat terumah. We do not say it. So what's the deal? How do you explain the contradiction between this Mishnah and this Baraita? Amar le Rabba says, terumah agitin kadamit, terumah efshar, get la efshar. So Rabba says these are two different subject matters. You can't compare them. Terumah is an easy thing to not eat, right? She can eat chulin food. You don't have to eat terumah. Therefore, since you can get by perfectly well, all the Leviim and Yisraelim do it just fine, and so since you can be machmir, so be machmir and don't eat terumah. It's not such a hassle. Whereas a get is impossible. You can't tell, right? Because what is she going to do? She wants to get divorced, and he is not in the same town. So you're going to say you can't get divorced? It's impossible for you to get divorced in such a case? So there's no workaround. There's no other way for her to be able to remarry, except if he can send a get through an agent. And so since there is no other possibility, you can't just say be machmir, and that's the reason, right? So we'll rely on a chazakah when we have to. There is no alternative. But we're not going to rely on a chazakah when there's a simple alternative. All right, so now we resolved that answer, but now we're going to ask a question within the case of terumah. Two laws about terumah. Uremet terumah a terumah. Tenan bat Yisrael nesua lekohen vehalach ba'ala lemidat hayam ochelet betrumah becheskat shehu kayam. One is from our Mishnah that said bat Yisrael is married to a kohen, and then the kohen goes away. way, she can eat teruma and assume that the guy is alive. Fine. That was our Mishnah. And now we'll bring the Braita. Urminhu, harezi giter sha'achat kodem mitato asura lechol b'teruma miyad. This is the Braita that we just quoted. Here, the man says, here's your get, and it will take effect 1 minute before I die, that she has to stop eating teruma immediately. So now you can't answer the answer that Rabbah said, that you can't, that it's impossible to compare Gittin to teruma. These cases are both about Gittin. And so in both of these cases, she can just not eat teruma. And yet, in our Mishnah, we are lenient and say you can assume he's alive, even though we left him sick, maybe. Or he went away and we just don't know where he is. He's on a boat. So we can be lenient in our Mishnah, whereas in the Braita, we have to be stringent and say, well, maybe he's going to die in a minute. And therefore, already from now, you have to stop eating teruma. So we'll see a couple of answers to this. One is by Ravada Bered Rav Yitzchak, that case is different. Because he said you're not allowed to eat teruma before he dies. So you see, the Chazakah works for the present time. Since the last time we saw he was alive, so we assume that right now he is also alive. But a chazakah cannot work for the future, because eventually he's going to die. Eventually everyone's going to die. And so you can't say, oh, chazakah, he will still be alive in 500 years from now. It's not going to work. And now you can't say a chazakah, he'll be alive a year from now. You can't say a chazakah, someone will be alive even a minute from now. Chazakah works for the present, but not for the future. So that's why in our Mishnah, can I assume he's alive right now? Yes. But in the Braita, can I assume that my husband is going to be alive in a minute from now? No. And therefore you have to stop eating teruma immediately. Okay, that's one answer. Matkif la Rav Papa mimaydi umayit beresha dilmai maita beresha. Hold on, for the Braita, it's not true that it's for sure going to happen that the husband will die and she will be prohibited from eating teruma, because that only assumes that the husband will die first. How do you know that he's going to die first? Maybe she will die first, and if so, she can eat teruma her entire life. And therefore, there's no reason to say, oh, his eventual death in the future breaks the chazakah now, right? Because that is not inevitable. It is inevitable that the husband will die, but it's not inevitable that the husband will die first. And therefore, there's no reason to break the chazakah. And so he does not accept that answer. Ela amar Abaye la kashya ha Rabbi Meir de la hayish lemita ha Rabbi Yehuda de hayish lemita. The Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir doesn't worry about the imminent possibility of death, whereas Rabbi Yehuda does. So he's the author. So Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the Braita, because he does worry about this imminent potential death, and therefore says you have to worry about it and you have to stop eating teruma. So in fact, it's not a difference between the cases, even though one is where we left him sick and we don't see where he is now, and the other one was a minute before I die. But both of them would have the same. The difference between them is not because of that 1 minute. Rather, these are two different shitot, two different tanaim. Now, where do we see that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda disagree about worrying about something that is potential, can happen soon, but didn't happen right now? Ditnan halokeach yaim miben hakutim. It's from this source that we actually already learned. If someone buys wine from a Samaritan or anyone who does not take teruma and maser, so you know it didn't have teruma maser, but the person who buys it wants to drink it right away, and he doesn't have any vessels to separate teruma and maser. So how can he drink it right away? Let's say he buys 100 lug, and so he has to take teruma, which is, he's taking 2%, which is an average amount. And so that will be for teruma. He says the 2 lugim that I will in the future separate will be teruma. I'm not separating them now, but when I separate them tomorrow, retroactively, that will be the terumah I want to give now. So obviously, anything he drinks will not be the terumah because he's not separating anything that he already consumes. He'll separate something tomorrow from what's left over. And then he says another 10 will be for Maaser Rishon, another 9, which is 10% of what's left over after he takes the first 10% will be Maaser Sheni. And Maaser Sheni, which he has to eat in Yerushalayim, he can redeem it for money and make it chulin, unconsecrated, and then he can drink. Not the whole thing, he has to leave enough left over so that tomorrow he can separate out the 2 and the 10 that he had separated. And according to Meir, that is fine. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Osrin. However, these 3 sages say you cannot do that. And this source doesn't say why, but we already explained from a parallel source the reason is because according to these 3 sages, we are concerned that maybe this jug will burst and the wine will all spill out, and he won't be able to separate it. And if he doesn't separate it tomorrow, then retroactively he was drinking tebel today. And therefore, this is a parallel case. Now, this case is not talking about death of a person, but rather the death of a wine jug. But the principle is the same. Rabbi Meir does not worry about potentially bad thing happening. And he says, if right now the wine is there, then you can assume that the wine will be there, and so you can drink it now. So he would be the author of our Mishnah that says, even though the person will die, the Kohen husband will die, eventually, right now, he's alive. Last we saw him, he was alive, so we can assume he is alive now, and the wife can can eat terumah, and we don't worry about potential death. Whereas, according to the Yehuda, we do worry about the potential possibility of the wine jug breaking before he gets a chance to separate it, and therefore retroactively we have to say, you know what, you cannot have it now, right? Because then he will not have separated it, and retroactively it will not become kosher. So we have to say it's still tebel. So therefore, the Yehuda, in the case of the death would also say we have to, even though the person's alive now, we have to worry that he may die soon. Maybe in 1 minute from now, and then retroactively she will be divorced from a minute prior, and so the Yehuda worries about the wine breaking, and so therefore he would also worry about the husband dying, and so would prohibit in both of these cases. And so there you go. The Mishnah and the Braita is a machloket among these 2 Tanaim. Rava Amar, Shema met lo haishinan, Shema yamut haishinan. Rava offers a different distinction than what was just said. He says, I don't have to say it's a machloket Tanaim. I can explain the Mishnah and the Braita that both of them are according to everybody. And there's a difference in the principle because of the timing. This is very similar to the first answer that we already said. And so the Mishnah is talking about, are we concerned that he has already died? You don't have to worry about that. In other words, if we saw the guy, he was alive, and now he went on a trip. So we can assume that, can I eat this terumah right now, the wife asks? Says yes. You don't have to worry that he has died from the past until the present time when you're about to eat. So chazakah works at the present. Whereas the Braita is talking about a chazakah that's going to have to work for the future. That, can I assume, the wife will ask, that in 1 minute from now he will not die? No, that's a presumption about the future, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Chazakah doesn't work. Eventually he will die. It's going to be a minute during which it will be true that a minute from then the person will die. And so that, according to Rava, that's the difference. The Mishnah is only worried about from the present and backwards, and so we don't have to worry about that. There's a chazakah, he's alive. Whereas the Braita has to worry about that he may die a minute into the future, and there the chazakah does not work. That's Rava's answer. Amar le Rav Ada bar Matana le Rava v'hanod dekeshema yamutu upedige. And so now we're bringing Rava now here, right, and not beforehand when we had the other answer that was similar, because we want to ask him a question from this case of the wineskin, because the wineskin also is the same that we're worried about. It may burst in the future, and yet there is a machloket about this very case. So therefore, Rava, you should agree that there should be a machloket regarding the Braita, such that Rabbi Meir, who doesn't worry about the wineskin breaking, he would say, okay, you don't have to worry about that the husband will die, so she can eat teruma. Whereas the other sages, Rabbi Yehuda and his colleagues, would say, just like you do have to worry about the wineskin breaking, so too you have to worry, and they would agree with the Braita, right? But it really actually, the Braita case itself should be a subject of a machloket if you're going to compare it to the wineskin. What's the difference between them? So to come to the rescue, Amar Rav Yehuda mediskarta shane no devshas demasad leleshomher. The wineskin is different from a person dying, because a wineskin you can give it to a watchman who will protect it and make sure that it won't burst. Right? A wineskin it's not inevitable that a wineskin will have to burst. Right? It might last a very long time. You just if you put it in a safe place, then it will stay good. Whereas the person we do have to worry that he will die at some point. Therefore, it makes sense that Rabbi Meir will be lenient regarding a wineskin, because you can watch it very well, and so make sure it won't burst, and then and also it's not such a long time, right? You can go and separate the teruma and maaser a short time later, a few days later. It doesn't have to last 10 years before he goes and separates it. He just has to separate his teruma and maaser before it bursts. So that is easier to do, and that's why Rabbi Meir would say it's permitted in such a case. But even Rabbi Meir would agree that if you're talking about a person who is not, you have to assume he's not going to die. Well, you can put a person in good care, maybe the best hospital, but still eventually he's going to die, and you never know when it's going to be, and therefore we always have to worry that it may be in a minute from now, and therefore there cannot be a chazakah, and she should stop drinking right away, and therefore we can defend Rava's distinction. However, matkif la Rav Meshashia arvich arba sarich. No, you can't just say, well, the wineskin I'll give it to a watchman, because hey, that watchman is going to be good. He also needs someone to watch it, right? A guarantor, even a guarantor needs a guarantor. Who's a solid guarantor that they'll be you're sure that they can guarantee this loan, right? Oh, Lehman Brothers, they'll guarantee it, right? Not necessarily. Even Lehman Brothers needs a guarantor to bail them out. Okay, so therefore, Rav Meshashia says there's really no difference even whether a person is going to die or the wineskin is going to break. You can never be sure, and therefore Rabbi Meir, who permits in the wineskin, should also permit in the case of the teruma, the husband that gives a get, that will apply in a minute from now. He should also be lenient. Ela marava shema met lo chashinan shema yamut tanaehi. So Rava gives in and agrees that you're right. Regarding if a person has died, that's our Mishnah. Everybody will agree that we don't have to worry that a person has died in the past. The last time we saw him, he was alive. He went on a trip. We can assume he's still alive. The wife can eat teruma. That's fine. Chazakah works from the past until now. But if you can talk about the future, well, that's a machloket Tanaim. And the same machloket regarding the wineskin, where Rabbi Meir says it's okay, it's permitted, and the other sages say it's not, that the same thing will apply in the case of the Braita, when he makes a get for a minute from now. Rabbi Meir will say it's okay, she can continue eating teruma, and the other Chachamim, they would be the authors of the Braita, and they would say, no, you're not allowed to. Good. Regarding the next case in the Mishnah, that person sends an animal from elsewhere, and now they're going to offer it on his behalf. He says, hold on, how can you ever send an animal? Don't you need semicha? That's when the owner puts his hands on top of the animal and he puts his weight on it, and if it's a chatat, he says the sin that he did, that this should atone for. So you need semicha, right? Amar Rav Yosef bekorban nashim, Rav Papa amar bechatata of. Two answers. Either it was sent by a woman. Women do not have to do semicha, and so it's a woman that made some sin, has to give a sin offering, or if it's a bird offering, a bird sin offering, does not require placing hands on it. So it's one of those two, and so that way we take care of the semicha problem. Now, why do we need all three cases in the Mishnah? If it only said regarding get that you can assume that the person is alive, that's because there's no alternative for her to get divorced other than to assume that the husband is still alive since he was alive when he gave it to the messenger, he must be still alive, because otherwise she has no way out of the marriage. Whereas teruma, she has a way to eat. She can just eat chulin food. ויש מינן תרומה, דזימנין דלה אפשר, אבל חטאת העוף דמספקה, לה לאול חולין עזרה, צריכה. And if you only told me regarding teruma, there are some times when a person is poor and they can't afford chulin food, and all they can get their hands on is teruma food. And so, since in those cases you might say, oh, in the teruma we have to be lenient and assume the husband is alive because she needs this teruma to survive. But in the case of hatat ha'of, where we have a safek, if the husband is alive, very good. But if the guy who sent it, or the woman who sent it in this case, or the guy who sent a bird, here it's assuming the answer of a bird. It could be either answer. Okay, the person who sent the bird, if he's alive, good. But if he's dead, then we are not allowed to offer this as a sacrifice, because it will be equivalent to chulin azara. It's not actually totally chulin because it's consecrated, but instead in that case we would have to just let it die. But we would not be able to offer it as a sacrifice in the sanctuary. So I might say, you know what, misafek, maybe he's dead, so we should not offer it. And that's why the Mishnah brings a chidush and says, even in this case, you still go by the presumption, the chazakah, that the person who sent it is alive, and you are allowed to offer the bird sacrifice. Good. Next Mishnah. Shelosha devarim amar Rabbi Elazar ben Perata lifnei chachamim v'keimu et devarav al ir shekifa karkom. There are three items that Rabbi Elazar ben Perata said before the sages, and they agreed and ratified his rulings. And the first one is about people who besiege a camp of besiegers. You have an enemy that makes a siege around a city, and in that case, you hear about the siege. You can assume that the people inside are still alive, because even though they're under a siege can last sometimes many years, and the people will still be alive. Or you hear about a ship that's cast about in the sea, but it's still there, it's still floating, it's still sailing, but it's just in a storm. Or someone that's going to be judged in a capital case, but the verdict hasn't been set yet. So in all these cases, we presume the person is alive, right? Last we heard from the person, they were in a siege. Here's a picture of the siege of Masada, which the Romans, right, were besieged this for a long time. Eventually they did win, but all in the meantime, the people up there were alive. Or you hear, right, they're on a boat. Or they're going to be tried. But right now you can assume that they're alive. Aval. But if the besiegers conquered the city, well, then you have to assume that you cannot assume that the people in there are alive. They may be survivors, they may not be survivors, right? But that's it. They already breached the city and conquered it, then no good. Or if we heard that the sea has been lost, the boat has been lost at sea, has sunk, is no longer sailing well, then we have to assume that we cannot assume people lived, because many of them likely did not survive. Or someone, the verdict in capital punishment was already given a verdict and has been taken out to be executed. Now, obviously, it's not that case where we actually saw the execution, because then that would be clear. We know he's dead. It's a case where we know that they were taken out to execution, to the place where they're gonna do whatever execution, but it hasn't happened yet. Right? Can we assume? Maybe last minute he was saved? No, you cannot assume that, and therefore in these cases, three cases, the last ones, we have to be machmir both ways, because they might be alive, but they might be dead. Bat Yisrael Kohen, Bat Kohen Yisrael, Lo Tochal Bitzruma. So what's an example of a chumrah? If you had a Bat Yisrael who's married to a Kohen, well, if the Kohen is dead, then she can no longer eat terumah. So this Bat Yisrael, married to the Kohen, will not be able to eat terumah. Similarly, a Bat Kohen who grew up in her home being able to eat terumah, and she's married to a Yisrael, while she's married, she cannot eat terumah. If the husband is dead, then she can go back to her father's house and continue to eat terumah. She also cannot eat terumah. So in other words, both of these wives cannot assume that their husband is alive. They also cannot assume that their husband is dead. Therefore, they have to be stringent in both ways. And they cannot eat. So both of them cannot eat terumah. So that's this case. In the first case, they can assume that the husband is alive. So if it was just that there was a siege, but it was not, the walls were not yet breached, then the Bat Yisrael Kohen could eat terumah. Bat Kohen to Israel would not be able to eat terumah. So that would be simple. Okay, then the rabbis agreed to these three laws. Amar Rav Yosef, lo shanu ela bebet din shel Israel, aval bebet din shel umot ha'olam kevan degamir le dina liktala miktal katli le. Says this, the sefa here, where we say that when the person was already taken out to execution, then we cannot be sure. There's no chazakah either way. We don't know if they're alive or dead. That's only true in a bet din of Israel, in a Jewish court, because in a Jewish court we always want to try to release the person, and even after the verdict was signed, was given, and they're being taken from here to the place where they're going to do the stoning. The whole time we wait, maybe someone will come with new information so that we can get him off the hook. And we have a person waiting there with a flag to flag them down, to say, no, bring him back to Bet Din. And so because Jewish court is merciful and always wants to stop the execution, therefore we have to be machmir both ways, because the verdict already happened, so it's likely that he got it, but not necessarily true. You have to be machmir both ways. However, if it's in a non-Jewish, in a Roman court, once in the Roman court or whatever, Persian court, the verdict is given, then that's it. You can know the person is dead. Surely we can assume that he is dead, and therefore she can go back, the woman can go back to her original status. If she was a Bat Kohen to Israel, then she can eat terumah. It might not be the biggest of her worries when her husband was just given capital punishment, but nevertheless, we have to know her legal status. Abaye disagrees with Rav Yosef and says, that's not true. Even the non-Jewish courts, you never know, because they accept bribes. And so if you're able to get one of the executioners and bribe him to let him go, maybe he let him go, and therefore we have to be machmir, and we don't know that for sure he's dead. Shakli mekamed lechtom purset shen zmag lebatad michatam purse shen zmag la shakle. However, Rav Yosef told him, no, they may take a bribe before the verdict has been passed. You have a Persian word here for Middle Persian, meaning a transcript of a court, testimony, deliberation. Yes, they will take a bribe beforehand to change the verdict that they didn't give yet. But once the verdict is sealed, then the Persian courts do not take a bribe. And that's why Rav Yosef said what he said, right? This is after the verdict in the Persian court. That's it. You know that then they will go ahead with the execution. Metibe challenge to Rav Yosef. כל מקום שיעמדו שניים ויאמרו מעידין אנו את איש פלוני שנגמר דינו בבית דינו של פלוני ופלוני עדיו, הרי זה יהרג. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Makot about a person who was given a verdict to the death penalty, but then he ran away, and now he's caught later on and brought to a different Beit Din, but witnesses come and say, we testify that this person, he was given a verdict in that particular Beit Din, and this person were his witnesses, right? And they said he has to get capital punishment. So the Beit Din that finds him after he runs away gives them the capital punishment. And there's a question. Rav Yosef said that when a person is given a death penalty verdict in a Jewish court, you never know, that you don't assume that he's died, because maybe the court will overturn their verdict, right? Some new evidence will come in, they'll find a way. You cannot assume that. How come over here you don't worry about the same thing? It's maybe the original court after that said, you know what, we're actually going to change our mind. And so this testimony here is outdated. And even though the court said that he's going to give capital punishment, a verdict of capital punishment, maybe they changed their mind and we shouldn't kill him. But this Mishnah doesn't say so. The Mishnah says if they gave the verdict, then that's a final verdict. And if he was back there, they would have killed him already. But he ran away. But now you can kill him. Challenged to Rav Yosef. And the answer is Dilma Borech Shaneh. No, maybe someone who ran away is different. If he stayed with that court where he was, then the judges would have looked and looked and looked for some leniency, some way of getting him off the hook. But once he runs away, now they're not going to be lenient like that anymore and go out of their way. I mean, he's basically already proven guilty, so there's not a problem to give him the capital punishment. And so that's why in this case we don't worry about that. He ran away. Okay, we're not gonna look for any possible 0% chance things for reasons why he should get off the hook. Rather, they can kill him. But in general, the Bet Din will go all the way till the end and find any whatsoever reason to get him acquitted. Tashema. And now another challenge to Rav Yosef. Shama mi Bet Din shel Yisrael shayu omrim ish piloni met, ish piloni neherag, yasiu et ishto. If someone hears that in a Jewish court, and a rumor, he hears that from a Jewish court that they were saying this person died or this person was killed, then they can assume that that person really died or really was killed, and his wife can go get remarried, right? So the person that hears a Jewish court announce that can assume that is true. Mikom men stirisin shel goyim ish peloni met, ish peloni neherag, al yasiu et ishto. But if they heard from a non-Jewish court, judicial registrar, this long word means, this person has died, this person has been killed, then we do not allow them to be remarried. Now let's clarify first what this statement means. My met, my neherag. What does that mean? That he was killed or he died or he was killed? Ilama met mamash, neherag mamash. If it means he actually died or was killed, then in the case of the non-Jewish court, why wouldn't his wife be able to get remarried? We have a principle that if a non-Jew is speaking offhandedly, then we can trust them. And so here there was some announcement, so we should assume it's credible, right? There's no reason why they would be lying, and so we should allow them to remarry if in fact they mean literally that the person has already been killed. Rather, it must be that when this court is making some announcement, that what they mean is this person is going to be executed, not that they already were executed. All right, so now it makes sense that in the non-Jewish court we don't necessarily believe them because he wasn't actually killed yet, and so we never know what's going to happen. Okay, so now that we understand what the statement is talking about, that the person was not killed yet, so we're going to put that back into the first half of the Jewish court, and we see that in the Jewish court, if they say this person is going to be executed, his wife can go get remarried. And this is a challenge to Rav Yosef, right? And yet it says in a Jewish court his wife can go get remarried. Rav Yosef said in a Jewish court, if he was given the verdict but not yet killed, then, or we don't know if he was actually killed, we have to assume that the Jewish court found a reason to acquit him. But that's what Rav Yosef said. But this source says that if it was announced that he is going to be executed, you still, then that you can let his wife remarry, and you can assume that the Jewish court killed him. That's the opposite of Rav Yosef. Le'olam met mamash v'neherag mamash. So we answer for Rav Yosef when we go back to the original understanding, the simple reading of the words, that in fact it means that the court announced he actually died or he actually was killed. And then you asked, well, if so, then regarding the non-Jewish court, why would you not believe them if they're announcing that the person really was killed? If they're speaking offhandedly, then you believe them. That's true only that you believe them when they're speaking offhandedly if it's something that's not relevant to them. They're just like, yeah, I happen to see something. But something that, if it's a matter that is relevant to them, then you cannot trust them. And this would be something relevant. The non-Jewish court may be boasting. Yeah, we announced his verdict. Yeah, we killed him. We didn't go back on our word. Right? If we said we killed him and we gave him the verdict, and yes, we killed him and we're proud of it, and they're kind of boasting about it, but they may actually be lying. So because they have a reason to lie, a reason to boast and say that they fulfilled their verdict, that's why we cannot believe them. And so we're able to answer the challenge against Rav Yosef. All right, all that is one version of Rav Yosef, and now we're going to do the whole exercise in the opposite direction. Ika de amre amar Rav Yosef, lo shanu ela bebetin shel umot ha'olam, aval bebetin shel Yisrael, kevan dinfak le dina le katla, katli le. In the second version, Rav Yosef says the opposite. Should be Rav Yosef. He says this is true. When the Mishnah says you have to put it on both chumrot, when you hear that a verdict has been issued in a court, then you have to be machmir, because we don't know for sure if the verdict was actually executed or not. That's only true in a non-Jewish court where you never know what happened. Maybe they're boasting, maybe someone bribed them. But if it's in a Jewish court, once the person is given the verdict, then for sure they went ahead and executed him. You can be sure that the Jewish Betin, will actually execute him, the opposite. And so here, Amar le Abaye, Betin shel Yisrael namev shadechazu lehu zechuta. Abaye challenges him, not from being accepting bribes, but the opposite, that a Betin is a Jewish Betin is merciful and may look for merit. How come you don't consider that? And maybe he's really didn't die. Ki chazu le zechuta mekamed legmar dina. Batal gemar dina tu la chazu le zechuta. So yes, it's true that a Jewish Betin will look for merit. That's before the verdict. They do everything. There's a whole list of things in Masechet Sanhedrin of how they make sure not to give anyone capital punishment. And they will look for any merit. But after the verdict, then it's already so unlikely, right? They already went through every possibility beforehand. And so, yes, even though technically it is possible that someone could come to the execution spot and say, I have something to say, and they'll wave the flag and bring him back. Someone come to the Betin and they'll wave the flag at the Betin and they bring him back and acquit him. It is technically possible, but it's so rare because they did such a thorough job beforehand. And that's why if there's a verdict in the Jewish court, you can be sure it was executed. Good. That's answers. Now, lema mesayeh le, and now we're going to bring this whole source from the Mishnah Makot to support Rav Yosef, and then we'll end up saying, no, it's not necessarily a support. Kol makom she'amdu shnayim v'yomeru me'edim anu et ish peloni, shenigmar dino bet dino shel ploni ufloni aidav, harei zeh yehareg. Here we have a case where with the runaway convict, and now he's caught, and someone says, I testify that he was given this verdict in that betin, and these were his witnesses. The new betin can assume that the verdict, that the original betin stands, and they wouldn't change their mind, and therefore they can go and kill him. Isn't this a proof that when a Jewish betin gives a verdict, it doesn't change? And we say not necessarily. Maybe it won't change only because he's a runaway, so we're going to treat him a little bit more harshly than if he had stayed in his place. And if he stayed in his place, maybe we would have found a way to acquit him even after the verdict. Okay, so that's not necessarily proof. Now we're going to try a second proof. Tashema shama mi betin she'Yisrael shayu omrim ish peloni met, ish peloni neherag yasiu et ishto mikom mentresem shel goyim ish peloni met, ish peloni neherag al yasiu et ishto mai met umai neherag. So, in this statement that says if it's a Jewish court that announces this person has died, this person's been killed, we know that for sure he was killed and his wife can go get remarried. But if it's from the non-Jewish judicial registrar, then, and they say this person died, this person was killed, we do not. Now, how do we interpret this statement? What does it mean when it says killed and or died or killed? If the announcement is that he actually died, Goyim amai al yasiu et ishto, then how come in the non-Jewish registrar they don't allow the wife to get remarried? Right? We have a principle that if a non-Jew is speaking offhandedly, then they are credible. So we should allow the wife to get remarried. Rather, it must be that they actually that he was given a verdict, but not actually killed. They're just announcing that there was a verdict of death penalty, that they will be killed. And yet, look how it says in the Jewish court, he is killed. And this is a support for Rav Yosef, because in the second version, Rav Yosef says in the Jewish court, once they say they're going to kill a person and give a verdict, then for sure they will. And here, when it says ish ploni neherag, it means that it was given a verdict, and you can go ahead and allow the wife to get remarried, because you can assume that they followed through on the verdict. So doesn't this support Rav Yosef? And we say not necessarily. No, really, this statement means that he was actually killed. And that what you asked about in the non-Jewish court, why can't they remarry? We should believe them because they're speaking offhandedly. But that's true. That principle is true. That's if they have no attachment, no relevance to the issue whatsoever. They just happen to be speaking, oh yeah, I happen to see that thing is blue. But if it has some relevance to the non-Jew, and here it will have some relevance because, let's say it's in fact not true, and they made a verdict, but then they ended up not following through with it, it's going to make them look bad that they don't follow through with their verdict. And so they're going to want to say, oh, that person, he was taken out to die, and he was in fact killed, but maybe it's not actually true. They're going to say, yes, we killed him, but it's not in fact true. They only had a verdict, but they didn't end up killing him because whatever, they got a bribe, or they were just weren't organized and didn't follow through, whatever reason, but they will lie. And so therefore in this case, that's why we cannot trust that for sure they did it, and so the wife cannot get remarried, and therefore this is not a proof for Rav Yosef. And tomorrow we'll continue with the next Mishnah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.